The small coastal town of Harborview hugged the edge of the sea like a secret waiting to be told. Waves crashed against jagged cliffs, sending up sprays of salt that mingled with the crisp autumn air. Cobblestone streets wound through rows of weathered shops, their windows glowing warmly against the grey sky. Seagulls cried overhead, their calls blending with the distant hum of fishing boats returning to harbour. It was a place where time seemed to slow, where the rhythm of the tides dictated life's pace. Emily Harper had always found peace here. At 32, she ran Pages by the Sea, a quaint bookstore nestled between a bakery and a hardware store. The shop smelled of aged paper and the coffee she brewed each morning, its shelves lined with novels that promised escape. With her dark hair pulled into a messy bun and a quiet strength in her hazel eyes, Emily was a fixture in Harborview, a woman who loved stories almost as much as she loved her husband, Mark. Mark, a fisherman with hands roughened by years at sea, had been her anchor for 5 years. Their marriage wasn't perfect, whose was, but it was steady, or so she believed. Lately, though, he'd been distant. His returns from fishing trips were marked by silences, his gaze drifting out the window instead of meeting hers. Emily chalked it up to exhaustion, to the long nights hauling nets under a starless sky. But a flicker of doubt had begun to grow, a shadow she couldn't quite name. That morning, as she arranged a display of new arrival shard covers, with spines still uncreased, the bell above the door chimed. A woman stepped inside, her presence like a gust of wind through the stillness. Sarah, the town's newest resident, was an artist with wild curls tumbling over her shoulders and a bohemian flair that turned heads. Her paintings of the coast had already started selling at the local gallery, their bold strokes capturing the wildness of the sea. "Hi, Emily." Sarah's voice was bright, almost too bright. "I'm looking for books on coastal landscapes. I need some inspiration for my next piece." Emily forced a smile, though it felt tight on her lips. "Sure, follow me." As they moved toward the nature section, Sarah chattered about her Artho. The light here was different, how it danced on the water. Emily nodded, half listening, her mind snagging on something else. Mark had mentioned Sarah more than once lately, his tone warm when he spoke of her talent. It hadn't bothered Emily then, but now, standing beside this vibrant stranger, a thread of unease tightened in her chest. Hours later, as Emily locked up the shop, she spotted a sketchbook on the counter. It wasn't hers. She hesitated, then opened it. Page after page revealed sketches of Harborview, the cliffs, the harbour, the lighthouse piercing the fog. But then she turned a page and froze. There was Mark, his rugged jawline and deep-set eyes rendered in charcoal. Another page, another sketch of him, this one with a softness in his expression Emily hadn't seen in months. Her pulse quickened. Why would Sarah draw him so often, so intimately? That night, Mark didn't come home until midnight. Emily waited, the sketchbook burning a hole in her thoughts. When the door finally creaked open, he stepped inside, smelling faintly of salt and something sweeter paint, maybe. "Where've you been?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. He flinched, caught off guard. "Out with the guys. Lost track of time." She held up the sketchbook. "Sarah left this at the shop today." His face drained of colour. "That's hers. She must have forgotten it." "It's full of drawings of you, Mark. Dozens of them. Care to explain?" He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes darting away. "She's an artist, Em. She draws people. It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal?" Her voice rose, trembling. "These aren't casual sketches. They're personal, intimate. What's going on?" A beat of silence stretched between them, heavy as the fog outside. Then he sighed, defeated. "I didn't want you to find out like this. It just happened. Me and Sarah." The words hit her like a wave, cold and suffocating. "How long?" "A few months," he mumbled, staring at the floor. Emily's world tilted. She turned away, tears stinging her eyes. "I need time to think," she whispered, barely audible. He nodded, guilt carving lines into his face. "I'll take the couch." Sleep eluded her that night, her mind a tangle of hurt and questions. But as dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Emily resolved to dig deeper. She pulled out their laptop, something she rarely touched. Mark had always handled their finances. What she found stole her breath. A secret account in his name, hidden behind passwords she guessed on the third try. Deposits and withdrawals, thousands of dollars she'd never known about. And then, buried in his email, a confirmation. 2 plane tickets to Paris, booked for next week. 1 for Mark, 1 for Sarah. Betrayal sharpened into something colder fury. He wasn't just cheating, he was planning to leave her, to vanish with money he'd siphoned from their life together. Emily's hands shook as she stared at the screen. She could confront him, demand answers, but she needed more than words. She needed leverage. Then, a new email pinged. It was from a lawyer, subject, Estate of Margaret Harper. Her aunt, who'd passed months ago, had owned a cottage on the cliffs. The message was brief. The property had sold, and Emily, the sole heir, was due a substantial sum enough to rewrite her future. Her breath caught. This wasn't just money, it was power, a lifeline. She could leave Mark, start over, or she glanced at the plane tickets on the screen she could fight back. As she weighed her options, the phone rang. It was Lisa, her best friend from the city, her voice a lifeline through the static. "Hey, Em, how's it going?" Emily swallowed hard. "Lisa, I need your help. Mark's been having an affair with Sarah, the artist. They're planning to run off together next week with money he's been hiding." A gasp, then silence. "Oh, Em, what are you going to do?" "I don't know, but I just inherited a lot of money from Aunt Margaret's estate. I could use it to confront them, maybe. Or leave." "Come stay with me," Lisa urged. "Get some space. We'll figure it out." "Okay," Emily said, a plan forming. "But first, I need to handle something." She hung up, grabbed a bag, and started packing. That's when she saw a letter on the dresser, her name scrawled in Mark's handwriting. Her heart thudded as she tore it open. "Emily, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you can forgive me someday, Mark." Panic clawed at her. Gone? She rushed to the living room empty. His coat, his boots, his fishing gear all missing. But the tickets were for next week. Had he left early? Or was this a bluff? Determination hardened within her. She snatched her keys and bolted out the door. She had to find them before they slipped away for good. Emily stood frozen in the doorway of the cottage, her hand still gripping the doorknob, as Sarah's words echoed in her mind. Something valuable, hidden here. The dim light from the corner lamp cast long shadows across the room, making Mark and Sarah's faces look ghostly and unfamiliar. Lisa hovered behind her, a silent pillar of support, her breath shallow with anticipation. "Tell me everything," Emily repeated, her voice a low growl, barely containing the storm of emotions swirling inside Heringer, betrayal, and now a flicker of curiosity. Sarah swallowed hard, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Mark shot her a warning glance, but she ignored him, her eyes fixed on Emily. "It's not just about the cottage's value or the estate sale," Sarah began, her voice trembling. "Your aunt, she wasn't just some eccentric old lady who liked to paint and fish. She had secrets, big ones." Emily's brow furrowed. Aunt Margaret had always been a bit of a mystery living alone in this weathered cottage, filling it with odd trinkets and cryptic journals. But secrets? Valuable secrets? Emily took a step closer, her heart pounding. What kind of secrets? Sarah hesitated, then stood, moving toward a small bookshelf in the corner. She pulled out a dusty leather-bound journal, its edges frayed from years of handling. "Mark found this a few months ago when when we started coming here to get away. It was tucked behind some loose boards in the wall." Mark's jaw tightened. "Sarah, don't!" "Shut up, Mark," Emily snapped, her eyes blazing. "You've lost the right to tell anyone what to do." Sarah handed the journal to Emily, her fingers trembling. "It's all in there. Your aunt was part of something group, a network. She hid something here, something people have been looking for since before you were born." Emily flipped open the journal, her breath catching as she recognized Aunt Margaret's spidery handwriting. The pages were filled with sketches of the coastline, cryptic notes, and what looked like map lines and symbols crisscrossing the cliffs and harbor. One word stood out, scrawled in red ink. "Pearl." "The Black Pearl?" Lisa whispered, peering over Emily's shoulder. "That old legend." Emily's mind raced. The Black Pearl was a story every kid in Harborview grew up hearing, a priceless gem supposedly lost in a shipwreck off the cliffs centuries ago. Fishermen claimed it was cursed, a myth to scare off treasure hunters. But Aunt Margaret's journal suggested it was more than a tale. "She found it," Sarah said quietly. "Or at least, she knew where it was. That's why Mark and I were here. We thought if we could find it, we'd have enough to start over somewhere else. Paris, maybe. Away from all this. Emily's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. So that's your big catch, Mark? Not fish, not money from our account, but some pirate treasure you were going to steal from my family? Mark rubbed his face, guilt and desperation etched into his features. I didn't know it was tied to your inheritance at first. Sarah found the journal and we started piecing it together. I swear, I was going to tell you. When? Emily cut in, her voice sharp as a blade. After you'd sold it and left me with nothing? Silence hung heavy in the room, broken only by the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. Emily clutched the journal tighter, her mind spinning. If this was true, if Aunt Margaret had hidden the black pearls somewhere in this cottage, it changed everything. She didn't need Mark's half-hearted promises or their crumbling marriage. She had power now, a legacy she could claim for herself. Where is it? Emily demanded, turning back to Sarah. If you've been looking for it, you must have some idea. Sarah bit her lip, glancing at Mark again. We think it's under the floorboards in the attic. There's a trap door. Mark was going to check it tonight. Emily didn't wait for more. She stormed toward the narrow staircase leading to the attic, Lisa close on her heels. Mark called after her, Wait, we don't know what's up there. But Emily was done listening to him. She climbed the creaky steps, the air growing colder and mustier as she reached the attic door. It was a small, slanted space, cluttered with old fishing gear and boxes. In the center of the floor, barely visible under a threadbare rug, was a faint outlinear trapdoor. Lisa helped her pull the rug aside, revealing a wooden hatch with a rusted metal ring. Emily's pulse raced as she grabbed the ring and yanked. The trapdoor groaned open, releasing a puff of stale air. Below was a shallow crawl space, and nestled in the dirt was a small, weathered chest, its surface crusted with salt and age. Emily dropped to her knees, her hands shaking as she pulled the chest free. It was heavier than it looked, the wood splintered but intact. She fumbled with the latch, her breath hitching as it clicked open. Inside, cushioned on a bed of faded velvet, was a gem the size of a walnut jet black, shimmering with an eerie, iridescent glow. The black pearl. It was real. Holy crap, Lisa breathed, staring at it. You're rich. Emily couldn't speak. She lifted the pearl, its weight cold and solid in her hand. This wasn't just wealth, it was proof that Aunt Margaret had trusted her, had left her something extraordinary. Mark and Sarah's betrayal didn't matter anymore. She had this. Footsteps thudded up the stairs, and Mark burst into the attic, Sarah behind him. His eyes widened at the sight of the pearl. You found it, he whispered, awe and greed flickering in his gaze. Yeah, Emily said, standing and slipping the pearl into her pocket. And it's mine. Mark took a step forward, but Lisa blocked his path, her stance fierce. Back off, Mark. You've done enough. Emily met his gaze, her voice steady. You can have your escape, Mark. Take Sarah, take your plane tickets, and go. But this stays with me. Sarah tugged at Mark's arm. Let's just leave, Mark. It's over. For a moment it looked like he might argue, but then his shoulders slumped. He nodded, defeated, and followed Sarah back down the stairs. Emily waited until she heard the front door slam before letting out a shaky breath. Lisa put a hand on her shoulder. What now, Em? Emily looked at the journal in her hand, then at the trap door, her mind buzzing with possibilities. Now? I figure out what else Aunt Margaret left me. This can't be the only secret she buried. As they descended the stairs, the wind howled outside, rattling the cottage windows. Emily paused, glancing back at the attic. The black pearl was just the beginning she could feel it. Something bigger was waiting, hidden in the shadows of Harborview. And she was going to find it. The first light of dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and golds. As Emily and Lisa set out from the cottage, the black pearl tucked safely in Emily's pocket and Aunt Margaret's journal clutched in her hands. The visit from Victor Kane the night before had left them rattled, but it had also fueled their determination. Whatever secrets the pearl held, they needed to uncover them before someone else did. The map in the journal pointed to a spot near the base of the cliffs overlooking Harborview's Harborough jagged line, tracing a path to an X that promised answers. The air was crisp with the tang of salt as they descended the winding trail from the cottage to the shoreline. Emily's mind buzzed with questions. Who was Victor Kane, really? How had he known about the pearl so soon after she'd found it? And what about those shadows she'd glimpsed last night? Were Mark and Sarah still lurking? Or was it someone else entirely? She pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the task ahead. The cliffs loomed closer, their dark faces streaked with moss and weathered by centuries of wind and waves. "Here," Lisa said, pointing to a narrow crevice in the rock where the trail met the cliff base. "The map shows a turn here toward the water." Emily squinted at the journal, aligning the sketch with the landscape. The X was just beyond the crevice, near where the cliffs dipped into the sea. "It's got to be a cave or something hidden by the tide," she said. "Let's check it out." They squeezed through the crevice, the damp stone cold against their skin, and emerged onto a rocky ledge that hugged the cliff face. Below, the harbor's waves crashed against the rocks, sending up sprays of white foam. Ahead, the ledge curved around a bend, disappearing from view. Emily's heart raced. This felt right, like they were on the cusp of something big. As they rounded the corner, the ledge widened into a shallow platform, and there it was, a jagged opening in the cliff, half hidden by a curtain of vines and seaweed. A cave. The tide was low, leaving the entrance accessible, but Emily could see the waterline creeping up the rocks. They'd have to move fast. "Jackpot," Lisa breathed, grinning. "Your aunt was a genius at hiding things." Emily pulled back the vines, revealing a dark tunnel that sloped downward into the cliff. "Let's see what she was hiding down there." They switched on their phone flashlights and stepped inside, the air growing cooler and heavier with the scent of salt and earth. The tunnel twisted and turned, its walls etched with faint carving spirals, waves, and what looked like a stylized pearl. Emily's fingers brushed one of the carvings, and a shiver ran through her. These weren't random markings, they were deliberate, ancient. After a few minutes, the tunnel opened into a cavern, and their lights swept across a sight that stole their breath. The chamber was small but awe-inspiring, its walls glistening with moisture and embedded with shells and fossils. In the center, on a rough stone pedestal, sat a rusted iron chest, its surface crusted with barnacles. Scattered around it were fragments of old wood and roper remnants of something long forgotten. "Is that?" Lisa started, her voice echoing faintly. "The heart of the sea," Emily finished, recalling the phrase from the journal. She approached the chest, her hands trembling as she lifted the lid. It creaked open, revealing a velvet lining cradling a single object, a large, iridescent shell, its surface shimmering with blues and greens. It wasn't a gem or gold, but it radiated a strange, almost otherworldly beauty. "It's gorgeous," Lisa whispered, stepping closer. "But what is it?" Emily flipped through the journal, landing on a page she'd skimmed earlier. There, in Aunt Margaret's handwriting, was a description. "The heart of the CA relic of the Order, said to hold the power of the tides, guarded for generations, its location lost until now." Below it was a note. "The pearl unlocks its resting place, but its true purpose remains a mystery." "The pearl unlocks it," Emily murmured, pulling the black pearl from her pocket. She held it up, noticing a small indentation in the shell's edge that matched the pearl's shape. Hesitantly, she pressed the pearl into the slot. There was a soft click, and the shell began to glow faintly, casting a rippling light across the cavern walls. "Whoa," Lisa said, stepping back. "Did your aunt mention anything about that?" Emily shook her head, mesmerized. "No, but she wrote about the Order Guardians of something powerful. Maybe this is what Victor was after. Not just the pearl, but this." Before they could process it further, a sound echoed through the tunnel footsteps, heavy and deliberate, approaching fast. Emily snatched the shell and pearl from the chest, shoving them into her bag. "Someone's coming," she hissed. "We need to get out of here." They darted back into the tunnel, their lights bouncing off the walls as they retraced their steps. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by muffled voices. Emily's stomach knotted. Had Victor followed them? Or was it Mark and Sarah, back to cause trouble? They emerged onto the ledge just as the tide began to rise, waves lapping at the rocks below. Two figures stood silhouetted against the morning light at the crevice's entrance. Victor Kane, his sharp features unmistakable, and beside him, a woman Emily didn't recognize, her expression cold and calculating. "Miss Harper," Victor called, his voice carrying over the wind. "I see you've been busy. Hand over the pearl and whatever else you've found, and we can avoid any unpleasantness." Emily clutched her bag tighter, her mind racing. "Stay back," she shouted. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this doesn't belong to you." The woman smirked, stepping forward. "It doesn't belong to you either, girl. The Order's relics are ours to claim." Lisa grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her toward the edge of the ledge. "We can't fight them here. The tide's coming in. We need to move." Emily nodded, her eyes locked on Victor and the woman. The path back to the crevice was blocked, but the ledge extended further along the cliff, toward the harbor. It was risky, but it was their only shot. "Go!" Emily yelled, and they bolted, the wet stones slick beneath their feet. Victor shouted something behind them, but the roar of the waves drowned it out. The ledge narrowed, forcing them to press against the cliff as the water rose, soaking their shoes. They reached a wider section, just as a third figure emerged ahead Mark, his face twisted with anger. "You should have stayed out of this, Emily," he snarled, blocking their path. Emily's heart sank. They were trapped Victor and the woman closing in from behind, Mark ahead, and the rising tide below. She gripped the bag with the shell and pearl, her mind scrambling for a way out. The journal had led them here, but it hadn't prepared them for this. "Lisa," she whispered, "we're going to have to jump." Lisa's eyes widened, but she nodded. The water was cold and rough, but it was better than facing Victor's crew. They edged closer to the drop, the waves crashing below. "On 3, Emily said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. 1, 2. Emily's heart raced as she and Lisa teetered on the cliff's edge, the wind howling around them. Below, the harbor's waves crashed violently, illuminated by the moon's pale light. Victor Kane and his crew were closing in from behind, their boots crunching on the rocky path, while Mark stood ahead, his face a mix of guilt and desperation. The rising tide lapped at their ankles. There was no way back. "On 3, Emily whispered, her voice firm despite the panic surging within. 1, 2, 3. They leapt. The icy water slammed into Emily, stealing her breath. She flailed against the current, clutching the bag with the relics, the heart of the sea, and the black pearl as it threatened to drag her under. Beside her, Lisa sputtered, battling the waves. "To the dock!" Emily yelled, spotting a small fishing pier nearby. They swam with all their strength, the cold numbing their limbs. Finally, Emily's hand grazed the dock's rough edge. A calloused hand reached down, hauling her up. "Easy, lass," growled old Tom, the harbor's weathered fisherman. He squinted at her. "Emily Harper? What are you doing in the water this late?" "No time," Emily gasped, helping Lisa onto the pier. "We're in trouble." Old Tom glanced at the cliffs, where shadows flickered. I see that. Come with me." He ushered them to his fishing shack, a cramped space cluttered with nets and tools. Emily and Lisa sank onto a bench, shivering as old Tom handed them blankets and lit the stove. "Warm up. I'll keep an eye out." As warmth returned, Emily pulled the relics from her bag, their faint glow persisting. Lisa caught her breath. "Victor won't stop. We need a plan." Emily nodded, flipping through Aunt Margaret's damp journal. Then she noticed Ita's hidden seam in the back cover. She pried it open, revealing a fragile letter in her aunt's handwriting. "Dearest Emily, if you found the heart of the sea, you're closer than I ever was. The Order of the Tides protected it for centuries, but its power is perilous. It unlocks a temple beneath the harbor, a source of immense energy. The pearl is the key, the heart is the lock. Victor Kane seeks this power. He's tied to the Order's traitors. You must seal the gateway forever. The relics will activate the temple's defenses, but they'll be destroyed in the process. You're strong, Emily. Trust yourself. Love, Aunt Margaret." Emily's chest tightened. Aunt Margaret had known everything, and now it was up to her. Lisa peered at the letter. "We have to destroy them to stop him?" "Yes," Emily said, a pang of regret hitting her. The relics were her heritage, but their loss was the price of safety. Old Tom coughed. "There's a smuggler's tunnel under the harbor. Risky, but it might get you near this temple." "Take us there," Emily said, standing. The tunnel was dank and tight, its walls dripping with seawater. Old Tom's lantern guided them as they descended, the air growing frigid. At last, it opened into a massive cavern, glowing with bioluminescent algae. A stone archway stood at its center, etched with spirals and waves the gateway. "This is it," Emily murmured, approaching with the relics. A cold voice cut through the silence. "Well done, Miss Harper, but you're out of time. Victor stepped from a shadowed tunnel, flanked by his ally and two henchmen. Mark and Sarah followed, looking ashamed. "Mark?" Emily's voice cracked. "Why?" "I'm sorry, Em," he muttered. "Victor promised us freedom." Sarah's eyes pleaded. "He forced us." "Enough," Emily snapped. "You chose this." Victor smirked. "Give me the relics, and I might spare you." Emily gripped them tighter. "Never." He signaled his men, but Lisa grabbed a harpoon from the wall, jabbing at them. "Back off!" Chaos erupted. Old Tom tackled a henchman. Lisa fended off another, and Emily darted to the archway. She slotted the black pearl into a carving and pressed the heart of the sea below it. The symbols blazed, and a vortex roared to life in the water. Mark suddenly grabbed Victor. "Emily now! We've got him!" Sarah shoved a henchman back. "Go!" Emily pulled the relics free as the archway trembled. The vortex surged, sucking Victor in as he roared in fury. His crew followed, vanishing into the light. With a final groan, the archway collapsed, sealing the gateway. Silence fell. The relics in Emily's hands dulled their power gone. Lisa ran to her. "It's over." Mark and Sarah approached, hesitant. We. "Stop," Emily said, rising. "You helped, and I'm thankful. But leave Harborview. We're through." Mark nodded, defeated. Sarah offered a weak smile. "Be well, Emily." They slipped away. Days later, Emily stood on the cliffs, the relics now mere artifacts in her hands. She donated them to the museum with the journal, preserving their story. With her inheritance, she turned the cottage into a community hub, honoring Aunt Margaret. Mark and Sarah left town, their chapter closed. Emily gazed at the sea, feeling lighter. She'd lost the treasures but gained herself. Lisa joined her, grinning. "What's next?" "Coffee at the bookstore," Emily said, smiling. "Then, my own story." With the waves crashing below, she walked toward a future she'd claimed as her own.